We have a beautiful statue of Saint Therese of Lisieux, the one we call the Little Flower, back in the rear of the church facing the welcome desk. She's, for a lot of people, a favorite saint, and her feast day is this week on Wednesday. She said something very interesting about hell. She said, "I think hell is empty." She said, "I'm sure hell must exist." She said, because it makes sense. It's written in Scripture, but also, you can't have a free relationship with God if you can't opt out of it. It wouldn't be a relationship if you were forced into it. That wouldn't be freedom. She said, but think about God. She said, God is infinitely lovable. And God is infinitely merciful. So she said, if at the moment of judgment we're with God, perhaps it's impossible for God's lovability and mercy to end in anything except us going to heaven. She said, only when we get there will we know. But she said, I think hell is empty. Interesting. And she's a doctor of the church. So the teaching that she gives is considered by the church to be among the more sublime, the more wise. When a saint who's a doctor of the church speaks, the church often says, listen to that. Wisdom. Now, interestingly, the gospel today says, yeah, but what if there's at least one person in hell, and it's this rich guy? Okay, all right, we're listening. We don't like it, but we're listening. Well, let's say this guy is in hell. And what Jesus is saying is, if he were there, it wouldn't be because he was rich, because like we talked about last week, a lot of people use wealth for amazing purposes. Wealth is not all good or all bad on its own. It all depends on what you do with it. He wasn't in hell because he had money. It's because he had no compassion. And this story is asking us to consider, if there's anyone in hell, do you suppose it would be for people with no compassion? It's an interesting thing to think about, because we all know that life is a school. You learn a lot in life, whether you go to Catholic school or not. Life is a school, and love is the lesson. That's the lesson. So one of the ways we can look at that is God is the source of all love, which makes all of us God's power lines. We're the ones who bring God's love out to all the corners in which we live. We're the conductors of God's love. God has a great big power grid, and it's us. Our job is to bring the love of God out into the world. And so if that's how it is, the people who are not able to love anyone are shorting out. They're not passing on the love that is God's plan for the world, for all of us to be the conductors, the power lines that deliver the love. It's interesting when we look at this story a little more deeply, because compassion is always a relationship between equals. You have to see somebody as your equal to feel for them, because you're recognizing that there's a commonality between you. So one of the big lines in this gospel that's meant to get our attention is the line, there's a chasm between us that can't be crossed. That's what Abraham said to the guy. He said, I know you want to come here, but there's a chasm that can't be crossed. And we know from the story, Lazarus did not create that chasm. It wasn't the poor guy who created the chasm. It was the fact that this guy couldn't see him at all. He wasn't mean to him. He didn't insult him. He didn't call the cops on him. He just had a big space between him and that guy. A space that was so big, at least in his mind and his heart, he couldn't even see over it. He didn't recognize that that guy was there. So one of the questions we're being asked is, how big is the chasm, the space between us and poor people? Is there a big space, or have we narrowed it over the years? Last year, a lot of you know that we moved the food pantry from the basement of the church over to Church Street so that it could be next to the parking lot and have a whole suite right in the garage there. And last year was the last full year, but we actually did it 2 years ago. And that means that our food pantry clients come on Fridays and they line up one car at a time, and volunteers, many of whom are sitting here right now, load their car with groceries and non-perishable items and produce and frozen meat and all sorts of stuff. And it's a beautiful thing. And actually, if you're here on a Friday and you look out, you'll be amazed at how many people come. A couple of times over the past year or two, people have said to me, "Father, move that again. I don't think it belongs over there." And I'll say, "Why?" And they'll say, "Well, there's kids over there. I mean, it's awfully close to the school, don't you think? Shouldn't they be somewhere else, farther away from the kids?" Do you hear the chasm? Bigger space between us. And you know what I say? And this is the truth. Oh, our food pantry is not just for criminals. It's for poor people. It's not for ex-offenders, though there are some wonderful programs that do that work, but ours isn't one of them. We don't ask the poor people anything about their history. We're there to help them because they have needs. Now, you know what's interesting? If I told that story to some of our food pantry clients, they wouldn't like it. And it wouldn't be for the reason you're thinking. They wouldn't like it. They wouldn't be upset that someone said, "Can't you go farther from the school?" No, if I told them that story, some of our clients would say, "Who you calling poor? I'm not poor. I'm just a little down right now. This economy's crazy. I'm not poor." Do you hear it again? The chasm. Don't put me next to those people. I'm just somebody who needs a little help with my food budget. That's always the temptation, is to put that Grand Canyon between us and people in need. And I think all of us are being asked this weekend, what can I do from my side to close the canyon a little bit? How can I make myself not so far removed from those in need? Well, for a lot of you, it's volunteering on Fridays at our food pantry. There's a lot of people who would tell me it's the most rewarding thing they've ever done. But it's during the day, and a lot of you can't do that. So what are other ways that we can close that chasm just a little bit? Recently, some of our teachers at our school have begun parking behind the church on Fridays. And they walk the block from here to the school, even though there's a parking lot much closer right behind the garage. But they're doing it to give the people who come to the food pantry a little more elbow room. Now, they're not doing it because they don't want to be near those people. No. As a matter of fact, we have our middle schoolers engaged in our food pantry ministry. They help haul the food donations there. And so we don't want our kids to not know about the needs of people in our community. We just don't want there to be a chasm. We don't want there to be people feeling like, there's nowhere to pull in here. I don't feel welcome here. This must not be for me. So this week, each of us has our own story. I don't know yours, you don't know mine, but all of us live in the same society. So all of us are being asked, how do I close the chasm a little bit between me and the poor? How do I reduce the gap just a little bit? On Thursday night, we had another event in the Great Hall, not Oktoberfest. This was something much more special. It was the annual gala for the Open Door Mission. We donated the use of that space so that they'd have no costs, so that they could raise money for the mission of that amazing ministry in our community right down the street, probably the most famous nonprofit that we have in town. And I would have a feeling that there were not many poor people at the gala that night. I bet most of the people that were there had money. But what they were doing is the same thing we're talking about. They were trying to close the gap. They were using whatever resources they had to close the gap. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to offer the space to them, because that organization was started by evangelicals. And we thought it would be good to close the gap a little bit between Catholics and other Christians as well. So if St. Therese is onto something, maybe hell isn't meant to be a threat. It's meant to be a way for us to sit up in our chairs and think about things more deeply, to start to take more seriously the things that God takes seriously. How do we make sure that we're not falling into the trap of the man in the story? We close the gap, fill in the chasm. How can we be more effective power lines that give the full voltage of God's love to all the places in our life? Mother Teresa said, "We're not going to understand any of this until we get to heaven. But once we're in heaven, only then will we realize how much we owe the poor for helping us love God better because of them."